The boy who once trembled at every sound is gone. In his place stands a man shaped by the wild, stronger, sharper, and no longer afraid. But courage is a fragile thing, and Waldo is about to learn how easily it can break. Deep in the jungle, fate is waiting, with blood on its hands, and a test that will decide whether he is still the frightened boy washed ashore or a warrior born of the wilderness. My dear friends, you're now watching part 2 of The Cave Girl. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, the link is waiting for you down in the comments. Go check it out first. Now, sit back and enjoy the next thrilling chapter of this incredible story. And if you're someone with a generous heart, give me a subscribe and a like. It means the world to me and keeps me motivated to bring you even more great stories. Thank you so much for being here. Alright then, let's dive back in. There was a lightning-like movement of Waldo's arm, and the Aborigine saw the spear darting swiftly through space toward his breast. He tried to dodge, but was too late, and down he went. Clutching madly at the slender thing which protruded from his heart, the man fell. Although another of his companions was close, Waldo could not relinquish his weapon without an effort. It had cost him considerable time to make, and twice today, it had saved his life. Forgetful that he had ever been a coward, he leapt toward the fallen man, reaching him with his pursuer. The two came together like mad bulls, the savage reaching for Waldo's throat, Waldo wielding his light cudgel. For a moment they struggled backward and forward, turning and twisting wildly. The caveman sought to close upon Waldo's wind, while Waldo strove to hold him at arm's length for the brief instant needed to deliver a sudden, effective blow from the cudgel in his grasp. The other savages were almost upon them when Waldo found his antagonist's throat. Throwing all his weight into the effort, he forced the caveman back until there was room to swing his stick. A single blow was sufficient. As the limp body slipped from his grasp, Waldo snatched his spear from the heart of its victim, and with the pack upon him, turned once more in flight toward the ocean. The howling band was close upon his heels now, nor could he greatly increase the distance between them. He wondered what the outcome was to be, for he did not wish to die in such a way. His thoughts reverted to his boyhood home, to his indulgent mother, to the friends that had been his. He felt at the last moment he was about to lose his nerve, that his manliness was counterfeit. Then came a vision of an oval, olive face framed by soft, black hair. And before it the fear of death dissolved into a grim smile. With those eyes upon him he could not be other than brave. He did not pause to analyze the reason, nor could he have done so had he tried. He only knew that with those eyes in mind, courage came, and a moment later he burst through the underbrush. He emerged upon the clearing that faced the sea. There by a tiny rivulet, he saw a sight that filled him with thanksgiving, and farther out upon the ocean that which he had hoped for a ship. Seamen upon the beach were filling water casks. There were a dozen of them, and as Waldo plunged from the forest they looked with startled apprehension at the strange apparition. A great, brown giant they saw, clad in a few ragged strings of white duck, for Waldo had kept his apparel as immaculately clean as hard rubbing and cold water would permit. In one hand the strange creature carried a long, bloody spear, in the other a light cudgel. Long, yellow hair streamed back over his broad shoulders as he advanced toward them. Several of the men those who were armed leveled guns and revolvers at him. But when they saw a broad grin and heard, "Don't shoot. I'm a white man," they lowered their weapons. He had scarcely reached them when they saw a swarm of naked men dash from the forest in his wake. Waldo saw their eyes directed past him and knew that his pursuers had come into view. "I'll have to shoot at them, I imagine," he said. "They're not exactly domesticated. Try firing over their heads at first. Maybe you can scare them away without hurting any of them." He disliked the idea of seeing the poor savages slaughtered. It didn't seem just like fair play to mow them down with bullets. The sailors followed his suggestion and fired warning shots. At the first reports, the cavemen halted in surprise and consternation. "Let's rush them," suggested one, and this was enough to send them scurrying back into the woods in fright. Waldo found that the ship was English and that all the men spoke his mother tongue. The second mate, who was in charge of the landing party, proved to have originated in Boston. It was much like being at home again. Waldo was so excited and wanted to ask so many questions that he became almost unintelligible. It seemed scarcely possible that a ship had come. He realized he had never actually believed a ship would come to this remote corner of the world. He had hoped and dreamed, but deep down he had felt that years might elapse before rescue. Even now it was difficult to believe that these were civilized beings like himself. They would soon be with families and friends, and he, Waldo Emerson Smith-Jones, was going with them. In a few months he would see his mother, his father, and his friends. He would be among his books once more. Yet the thought failed to thrill him, as it once surely would have. His books had been his real life in the past. Could it be they had lost something of their glamour? Had his brief experience with realities dulled his appetite for second-hand hopes and deeds? It had. Waldo still craved his books, but they alone would no longer suffice. He wanted something bigger, something tangible. He wanted not just to read and study, but to act and to do. His heart thrilled at the possibilities. Before the new Waldo Emerson, possibilities he never would have dreamed, but for the strange chance that had forced him into hardship and self-reliance. Yes, Waldo realized he owed a great deal to this experience, a great deal too. And then suddenly the truth rushed in upon him. He owed everything to Nadara. "I was never shipwrecked on a desert island," said the second mate, "but I can imagine how good you feel at being rescued, and that in an hour you will see your prison fading away." "Yes," acquiesced Waldo in a faraway voice. "It's awfully good of you, but I am not going with you." 2 hours later, he stood alone upon the beach, watching the ship disappear northward. A vague hint of tears dimmed his vision. Then he threw back his shoulders, swallowed the thing that had risen into his throat, and with high head turned back into the forest. In one hand, he carried a razor and a plug of tobacco, the sole mementos of his brief contact with civilization. The kindly sailors had urged him to reconsider, but he remained obdurate. They insisted on leaving some comforts with him. The only thing he truly wanted was a razor. Firearms he refused, for he had worked out a chivalry that forbade unfair advantage over the natives. At the last moment, one seaman had thrust upon Waldo a plug of tobacco. As he looked at it, now the young man smiled. That would indeed be the last step, according to Mother's ideas. The ship carried away Waldo's chance of escape, and also a long letter to his mother. It was vague and rambling, but promised he would take the first steamer for Boston once he was free. The skipper had told him there might never be another ship touch his island, so remote that scarcely a score of vessels had reported it since Captain Cook discovered it in 1773. Yet in the face of this, Waldo refused to leave. As he walked back toward his cave, he tried to convince himself he had acted from gratitude and fairness, to thank Nadara as a gentleman. But the excuse felt childish. His final decision was that he had acted the fool. Yet as he walked he hummed a joyous tune, his heart full of happiness and expectations he could not name. He resolved that the next sun would see him on his way to Nadara's village. His experience that day convinced him he might with reasonable safety face Flatfoot and mighty Korth. The more he dwelt upon the idea, the lighter his heart became. He should be in despair, yet though he had refused his chance home, even so his heart sang as he moved through the forest. He saw nothing of his earlier enemies, but his thoughts reverted to them. He became aware of a deficiency in his equipment, glaringly apparent after the morning's battle with the savages. He lacked a shield to ward off missiles, and a sword. With sword and shield, he might have fought at close quarters in safety, running his enemies through with infinite ease. This new idea meant delay. He must finish both shield and sword before departing for the village of Flatfoot. With meditation and planning, he made poor time on the return journey. It was after sunset when he entered the last deep ravine beyond, which lay his rocky home. In its depths it was already dark, though twilight still hung upon the surrounding hilltops. He had nearly completed the steep ascent when above him, silhouetted against the sky, loomed a great black, crouching mass, from the center of which blazed two balls of fire. It was Nagula, and he occupied the center of the only trail that led over the edge of the ridge from the ravine below, his blazing eyes fixed upon Waldo. "I had almost forgotten you, Nagula," murmured Waldo. "I could never have gone upon my journey without first interviewing you, but I could have wished a different time and place. Let us postpone the matter for a day or so," he concluded aloud. But the only response from Nagula was an ominous growl. Waldo felt rather uncomfortable at the situation. It was too dark for Waldo's eyes, and the cat was above him on a steep hillside with a precarious foothold. He tried to shoo the beast with shouts and gestures, but Nagula would not shoo. Instead, he crept slowly forward, edging his sinuous body inch by inch along the rocky trail until he hung poised above the waiting man, scarcely a dozen feet below, ready to spring. 6 months before, Waldo would have shrieked and fled, but now no cry escaped him. Far from fleeing, he edged upward toward the menacing creature, spear leveled beneath those baleful eyes. He had advanced but a foot or two when, with an awful shriek, the terrible beast launched itself full upon him. As the heavy body struck, Waldo went over backward down the cliff. With him went Nagula. Clawing, tearing, and scratching, the two rolled and bounded down the rocky hillside until, near the bottom, they came to a sudden stop against a large tree. The growling and screeching ceased, the clawing paws and hands were still. The tropic moon rose over the hilltop to look down upon a tangled mound of man and beast lying very quiet. For a long time, there was no sign of life in that strange pile of flesh and bone and brawn and glossy black fur and long, yellow hair and blood. But toward dawn it moved a little, down near the bottom of the heap, and a little later there was a groan, and then all was still again for many minutes. Presently it moved again, this time more energetically, and after several efforts a yellow head streaked and matted with blood emerged from beneath. It required the better part of an hour for the stunned and lacerated Waldo to extricate himself from the entangling embrace of Nagula. When, finally, he staggered to his feet, he saw that the great cat lay dead before him, the broken shaft of the spear protruding from the sleek, black breast. It was quite evident that the beast had lived but the barest fraction of an instant after it had launched itself upon the man. But during that brief interval of time it had wrought sore havoc with its mighty talons, though fortunately for Waldo the great jaws had not found him. From breast to knees ghastly wounds were furrowed in the man's brown skin, where the powerful hind feet of the beast had raked him. That he owed his life to the chance that had brought about the encounter upon a steep hillside rather than on the level seemed quite apparent. For during their tumble down the declivity Nagula had been unable to score with any degree of accuracy. You're watching this video on Good Stories. Welcome, my friends. I hope you enjoy every moment of it. Thank you so much for subscribing and hitting that like button. Your support truly means the world to me. As Waldo looked down upon himself, he was at first horrified by the frightful appearance of his wounds. But when a closer examination showed them to be superficial, he realized that the only danger lay in infection. Every bone and muscle in his body ached from the manhandling and the fall, and the wounds themselves were painful. Almost excruciatingly so when a movement of his body stretched or tore them. But notwithstanding his suffering, he found himself smiling. He contemplated the remnants of his long-suffering ducks. There remained of their once stylish glory not a shred. The panther's sharp claws had finished what time and brambles had so well commenced. And of their linen partner the white outing shirt. Only the neckband remained, with a single fragment as large as one's hand depending behind. Nature is a wonderful leveler, thought Waldo. It is evident that she hates artificiality as she does a vacuum. I shall really need you now, he concluded, looking at the beautiful, black coat of Nagula. Next Waldo turned his attention toward the fashioning of a sword, a new spear, and a shield, the first two were comparatively easy. He had them both completed in half a day, and from a strip of panther hide he made also a sword belt to pass over his right shoulder. But the shield almost defied his small skill. After nearly a week of painstaking endeavor, he wove a rude oval buckler of twigs and grasses. This he covered with skins of small animals that had fallen before his stones. A hide strap fastened upon the back held it to his arm. With it Waldo felt more secure against the missiles of the savages he knew he should encounter on his expedition. At last came the morning for departure. Rising with the sun, Waldo took his morning tub in the cold spring near his cave. He got out the razor the sailor had given him, scraped off his scanty beard, and hacked his tawny hair until it no longer fell in his eyes. Then he gathered up his weapons, rolled the boulders before his cave entrance, and set off down the stream toward the cliffs of Flatfoot and Korth. As he stepped along the hazardous trail, leaping from ledge to ledge, he might have been a reincarnation of some primeval hunter. The tall, well-muscled, brown body, the clear, bright eyes, the high-held head, all were far from the weak, futile creature of the beach. What one good but mistaken woman had smothered, another had brought out, and the result was a finer specimen of manhood than either alone. In the afternoon of the third day, Waldo came to the forest opposite the cliffs where lay the home of Nadara. Cautiously, he stole from tree to tree until he could look out unseen upon the honeycombed face of the lofty escarpment. All was lifeless and deserted. The cave mouths looked out upon the valley, sad and lonely. There was no sign of life. Crossing the clearing, Waldo approached the cliffs. Young grass grew in what had once been well-beaten trails. The caves had long been deserted. One by one, he entered several cliff dwellings. All corroborated the same truth. The village had been evacuated in order, everything of value removed. Waldo was utterly confounded. He had no idea in which direction to search. All afternoon he wandered the ledges, entering cave after cave. He wondered which had been Nadara's. He tried to imagine her life among these crude, primitive surroundings, so out of place among them. The more his mind dwelt upon her, the sadder he became. He tried to think it was disappointment in being thwarted, but his thoughts returned to her. He began to realize, vaguely, that he had come because he wanted to see Nadara again. Why, he did not know. That night, he slept in one of the deserted caves, and the next morning set forth upon his quest for Nadara. For 3 days he searched the little valley, but without results. There was no sign of any other village within it. Then he passed over into another valley to the north. For weeks he wandered without being rewarded by even a sight of a human being. Early one afternoon, topping a barrier in search of other valleys, he came face to face with a great, hairy man. Both stopped. The hairy one glared with his nasty little eyes. "I can kill you," growled the savage. Waldo had no desire to fight. It was information he sought. But he almost smiled. It was the same greeting Sag the killer had given him. It came as readily from these primitive men as good morning falls from civilized lips, though among the latter it had its counterpart too. "I have no quarrel with you," replied Waldo. "Let us be friends." "You are afraid?" taunted the hairy one. Waldo pointed to his sable garment. "Ask Nagula," he said. The man looked at the trophy. There could be no mightier argument for valor than that. He stepped closer to scrutinize it. Full grown and in perfect health, he grunted. "This is no mangy hide peeled from the carcass of one dead of sickness." "How did you slay Nagula?" he asked suddenly. Waldo indicated his spear, then drew his garment aside to show the vivid, new-healed scars striping his body. "We met at dusk at a cliff top. He was above, I below. At the bottom of the ravine Nagula was dead. But it was nothing for Thandar. I am Thandar." Waldo suspected bravado would impress the intellect primeval, nor was he mistaken. "What do you here in my country?" asked the man, less truculent now. "I am searching for Flatfoot and Korth and Nadara," said Waldo. The other's eyes narrowed. "What would you of them?" he asked. "Nadara was good to me, I would repay her." "But Flatfoot and Korth, what of them?" insisted the man. "My business is with them. When I see them I shall transact it," Waldo parried, disliking the cunning look in the man's eyes. "Can you lead me to them?" "I can tell you where they are, but I am not bound thither," replied the man. 3 days toward the setting sun will bring you to Flatfoot. There you will find Korth also and Nadara." And without further parley, the savage turned and trotted toward the east. Waldo watched him out of sight, half-minded to follow, for he was far from satisfied that the fellow had been entirely honest with him. Why he should have been otherwise Waldo could not imagine, but nevertheless there had been an indefinable suggestion of duplicity in the man's behavior that had puzzled him. However, Waldo took up his search toward the west, passing down from the hills into a deep valley, the bottom of which was overgrown by a thick tangle of tropical jungle. He had forced his way through this for nearly half a mile when he came to the bank of a wide, slow-moving river. Its water was thick with sediment. Not clean, sparkling, and inviting, as were the little mountain streams of the hills and valleys farther south. Waldo traveled along the edge of the river in a northwesterly direction, searching for a ford. The steep, muddy banks offered no foothold. So he dared not venture a crossing until he could be sure of a safe landing upon the opposite shore. A couple of 100 yards from the point at which he had come upon the stream, he found a broad trail leading down into the water. And on the other side saw a similar track cutting up through the bank. This, evidently, was the ford he sought. But as he started toward the river, he noticed the imprints of the feet of many animals, human and brute. Waldo stooped to examine them minutely. There were the broad pads of Nagula, the smaller imprints of countless rodents, but back and forth among them all were old and new signs of man. There were the great, flat footprints of huge adult males, the smaller but equally flat-footed impresses of the women and children. But one there was that caught his eye particularly. It was the fine and dainty outline of a perfect foot, with the arch well defined. It was new, as were many of the others, and, like the other newer ones, it led down to the river and then back again, as though she who made it had come for water and then returned from whence she had come. Waldo knew that the tracks leading away from the river were the newer, because where the two trails overlapped, those coming up from the ford were always over those which led downward. The multiplicity of signs indicated a considerable community, and their newness the proximity of the makers. Waldo hesitated but a moment before he reached a decision, and then he turned up the trail away from the river, and at a rapid trot followed the spoor along its winding course through the jungle to where it emerged at the base of the foothills. To wind upward toward their crest, he found that the trail he was following crossed the hills but a few yards from the spot at which he had met the caveman a short time before. Evidently, the man had been returning from the river when he had espied Waldo. The young man could see where the fellow's tracks had left the main trail, and he followed them to the point where the man had stood during his conversation with Waldo. From there they led toward the east for a short distance, and then turned suddenly north to re-enter the main trail. Waldo could see that as soon as the man had reached a point from which he would be safe from the stranger's observation, he had broken into a rapid trot, and as he already had 2 hours' start, Waldo felt that he would have to hurry were he to overtake him. Just why he wished to do so, he did not consider, but, intuitively possibly, he felt that the surly brute could give him much more and accurate information than he had. Nor could Waldo eliminate the memory of those dainty feminine footprints. It was foolish, of course, and he fully realized the fact. But his silly mind would insist upon attributing them to the cave girl Nadara. For 2 hours he trotted doggedly along the trail, which for the most part was well defined. There were places, of course, which taxed his trailing ability, but by circling widely from these points, he always was able to pick up the tracks again. He had come down from the hills and entered an open forest where the trail was entirely lost in the mossy carpet that lay beneath the trees, when he was startled by a woman's scream and the hoarse gutturals of 2 men, deep and angry. Hastening toward the sound, Waldo came upon the authors of the commotion in a little glade half hidden by surrounding bushes. There were 3 actors in the hideous tragedy: a hairy brute dragging a protesting girl by her long, black hair, and an old man who followed, protesting futilely against the outrage that threatened the young woman. None of them saw Waldo as he ran toward them until he was almost upon them. And then the beast who grasped the girl looked up, and Waldo recognized him as the same who had sent him toward the west earlier in the day. At the same instant he saw the girl was Nadara. In the brief interval that the recognition required, there sloughed from the heart and mind and soul of Waldo Emerson Smith-Jones every particle of the civilization and culture and refinement that had required countless ages in the building, stripping him naked, age on age, down to the primordial beast that had begot his first human progenitor. He saw red through blood as he leapt for the throat of the man-beast whose ruthless hands were upon Nadara. His lip curled in the fighting snarl that exposed his long unused canine fangs. He forgot sword and shield and spear. He was no longer a man, but a terrible beast. And the hairy brute that witnessed the metamorphosis blanched and shrank back in fear, but he could not escape the fury of that mad charge or the raging creature that sought his throat. For a moment they struggled in a surging, swaying embrace, and then toppled to the ground, the hairy one beneath, rolling, tearing, and biting. They battled, each seeking a death hold upon the other. Time and again, the gleaming teeth of the once fastidious Bostonian sank into the breast and shoulder of his antagonist, but it was the jugular his primal instinct sought. The girl and the old man had drawn away where they could watch the battle in safety. Nadara's eyes were wide in fascination. Her slim, brown hands were tight pressed against her rapidly rising and falling breasts as she leaned a little forward with parted lips, drinking in every detail of the conflict between the 2 beasts. But was the yellow-haired giant really fighting for possession of her, or merely in protection, because she was a woman? She could readily conceive from her knowledge of him that he might be acting now solely from some peculiar sense of duty, which she realized that he might entertain, although she could not herself understand it. Yes, that was it, and when he had conquered his rival, he would run away again, as he had months before. At the thought, Nadara felt herself flush with mortification. No, he should never have another opportunity to repeat that terrible affront. As she allowed her mind to dwell on the humiliating moment that had witnessed the discovery that Thandar had fled from her at the very threshold of her home, Nadara found herself hating him again, as fiercely as she had all these long months, a hatred that had almost dissolved at sight of him. As he rushed out of the underbrush a moment before to wrest her from the clutches of her hideous tormentor, Waldo and his antagonist were still tearing futilely at one another in mad efforts to maim or kill. The giant muscles of the caveman gave him but little if any advantage over his agile, though slightly less powerful, adversary. The hairy one used his teeth to better advantage, with the result that Waldo was badly torn and bleeding from a dozen wounds. Both were weakening now, and it seemed to the girl who watched that the younger man would be the first to succumb to the terrific strain under which both had been. She took a step forward and, stooping, picked up a stone. Her small strength would be ample to turn the scales as she might choose. A sharp blow upon the head of either would give his adversary the trifling advantage that would spell death for the one she struck. The two men had struggled to their feet again as she approached, with raised weapon. At the very moment that it left her hand, they swung completely round, so that Waldo faced her, and in the instant before the missile struck his forehead, he saw Nadara, in the very act of throwing upon her face an expression of hatred and loathing. Then he lost consciousness and went down, dragging with him the caveman, upon whose throat his fingers had just found their hold. When the old man saw what had happened, he ran forward and grasped Nadara by the wrist. "Quick!" he cried, quick, my daughter! You have killed him who would have saved you, and now nothing but flight may keep Korth from having his way with you." As in a trance the girl turned and departed with him. They had scarcely disappeared within the underbrush when Waldo returned to consciousness, so slight had been the effect of the blow upon his head. To his surprise, he found the caveman lying very still beside him, but an instant later he read the reason for it. In the little projecting ridge of rock upon which lay his foe's forehead, in falling the savage man had struck thus and lost consciousness. Almost immediately, the hairy one opened his eyes. But before he could gather his scattered senses, sinewy fingers found his throat, and he lapsed once more into oblivion from which there was no awakening. As Waldo staggered to his feet, he saw that the girl had vanished, and there swept back into his mind the memory of the hate that had been in her face as she struck him down. It seemed incredible that she should have turned against him. And at the very moment, too, when he had risked his life in her service. But that she had there could be no doubt, for he had seen her cast the stone with his own eyes. He had seen her. And, too, he had seen the hatred and loathing in her face as she looked straight into his. But what he had not seen was the look of horror that followed as the missile struck him instead of Korth, sending him crumpling to earth. Slowly Waldo turned away from the scene of battle, and without even a second look at his vanquished enemy, limped painfully into the brush. His heart was very heavy, and he was weak from exhaustion and loss of blood, but he staggered on, back toward his mountain lair, as he thought, until unable to go further, he sank down upon a grassy knoll and slept. When Nadara recovered from the shock of the thing she had done sufficiently to reason for herself, she realized that after all Thandar might not be dead. And though the old man protested long and loudly against it, she insisted upon retracing her steps toward the spot where they had left the yellow giant in the clutches of Korth. Very cautiously the girl threaded her way through the maze of shrubbery and creepers that filled the intervening space between the forest trees until she came silently to the edge of the clearing in which the two had fought. As she peered anxiously through the last curtain of foliage, she saw a single body lying quiet and still upon the sward, and an instant later recognized it as Korth's. For several minutes she watched it, before she became convinced that the man who had so terrorized her whole childish life could never again offer her harm. She looked about for Thandar, but he was nowhere to be seen. Nadara could scarcely believe that her eyes were not deceiving her. It was incredible that the yellow one could have gone down to unconsciousness before her. Unintentional blow, and yet have mastered the mighty Korth. But how else could Korth have met his death and Thandar be gone? She approached quite close to the dead man, turning the body over with her foot until the throat was visible. There she saw the finger marks that had done the work, and with a little thrill of pride she turned back into the forest, calling Thandar's name aloud. But Thandar did not hear. Half a mile away he lay weak and unconscious from loss of blood. Morning found Nadara sleeping in a sturdy tree upon the trail along which Waldo had followed Korth. She had discovered the footprints of the two men the evening before, while she had been searching unsuccessfully for the trail which Waldo had followed after the battle. She hoped now that the spoor might lead her to Thandar's cave, to which she felt it quite possible he might have returned by another way. When the girl awoke, she again took up her journey, following the tracks as unerringly as a hound up through the hilly country, across the divide and down into the jungle to the very watering place at which her tribe had drank a few days earlier. Here she made a brief stay, then on again down the river, back through the jungle, and onto the divide once more. She was much mystified by the windings of the trail, but for days she followed the fading spoor until, becoming fainter and fainter as it grew older, she lost it entirely at last. She was quite sure by now, however, that it led from her tribe's former territory, and so she kept on, hoping, against hope, that soon she would come across the fresh track of Thandar where he had passed her on his return journey to his home. Nadara had eluded the old man when she started upon her search for Thandar, so it was that the old fellow returned to the dwellings of his people alone the following day. Flatfoot was the first to greet him. "Where is the girl?" he growled. "And where is Korth? Has he taken her? Answer me the truth, or I will break every bone in your carcass." "I do not know where the girl is," answered the old man truthfully enough, "but Korth lies dead in the little glade beyond the three great trees. A mighty man killed him. He was dragging Nadara off into the thicket." "And the man has taken the girl for himself?" yelled Flatfoot. "You old thief you! This is some of your work. Always have you tried to cheat me of this girl since first you knew that I desired her. Whither went they? Quick, before I kill you." "I do not know," replied the old man. "For hours I searched, until darkness came, but neither of them could I find, and my old eyes are no longer keen for trailing, so I was forced to abandon my hunt and return here when morning came." "By the three trees the trail starts, you say?" cried Flatfoot. "That is enough, I shall find them. And when I return with the girl, it will be time enough to kill you. Now it would delay me too much." And with that the caveman hurried away into the forest. It took him half a day to find Nadara's trail, but at last his search was rewarded, and as she had made no effort to hide it, he moved rapidly along in the wake of the unsuspecting girl. But he was not as swift as she, and the chase bid fair to be a long one. When Waldo woke, he found the sun beating down upon his face, and though he was lame and sore, he felt quite strong enough to continue his journey, but whither he should go he did not know. Now that Nadara had turned against him, the island held nothing for him, and he was on the point of starting back toward his far-distant lair from where he might visit the ocean, often to watch for a passing ship. When the sudden decision came to him to see the girl again, regardless of her evident hostility, and learn from her own lips the exact reason of her hatred for him. He had had no idea that the loss of her friendship would prove such a blow to him, so that his pride suffered, as well as his heart, as he contemplated his harrowed emotions. Of course, he was reasonably sure that Nadara's attitude was due to his ingallant desertion, for which act he had long suffered the most acute pangs of remorse and contrition. Yet, he felt that her apparent vindictiveness was not warranted by even the grave offense against chivalry and gratitude of which he had been guilty. It presently occurred to him that by the traitorous attack which he believed that she had made upon him while he was acting in her defense, she had forfeited every claim which her former kindness might have given her upon him. You're watching this video on Good Stories. Thank you so much for subscribing and hitting that like button. Your support truly means the world to me. But with this realization came another humiliating thought. He still wished to see her. He, Waldo Emerson Smith Jones, had become so devoid of pride that he would voluntarily search out one who had wronged and outraged his friendship with the avowed determination of seeking a reconciliation. It was unthinkable, and yet, as he admitted the impossibility of it, he set forth in search of her. Waldo wondered not a little at the strange emotion inherent gregarious instinct, he thought it, which drew him toward Nadara. It did not occur to him that during all the past solitary months he had scarcely missed the old companionship of his Back Bay friends. That for once that they had been the subject of his reveries, the cave girl had held the center of that mental stage 1,000 times. He failed to realize that it was not the companionship of the many that he craved, that it was not the community instinct, or that his strange longing could be satisfied by but a single individual. No, Waldo Emerson did not know what was the matter with him, nor was it likely that he ever would find out before it was too late. The young man attempted to retrace his steps to the battleground of the previous day, but he had been so dazed after the encounter that he had no clear recollection of the direction he had taken after he quitted the glade. So it was that he stumbled in precisely the opposite direction, presently emerging from the underbrush almost at the foot of a low cliff tunneled with many caves. All about were the morose, unhappy community, whose savage lives were spent in almost continual wandering from one filthy, comfortless warren to another equally foul and wretched. At sight of them Waldo did not flee in dismay, as most certainly would have been the case a few months earlier. Instead, he walked confidently toward them. As he approached, they ceased whatever work they were engaged upon and eyed him suspiciously. Then several burly males approached him warily. At 100 yards they halted. "What do you want?" they cried. "If you come to our village, we can kill you." Before Waldo could reply, an old man crawled from a cave near the base of the cliff, and as his eyes fell upon the stranger, he hurried as rapidly as his ancient limbs would carry him to the little knot of ruffians. He spoke to them for a moment in a low tone, and as he was talking Waldo recognized him as the old man who had accompanied Nadara on the previous day at the battle in the glade. When he had finished speaking, one of the cavemen assented to whatever proposal the decrepit one had made, and Waldo saw that each of the others nodded his head in approval. Then the old man advanced slowly toward Waldo. When he had come quite close, he spoke. "I am an old man," he said. "Thandar would not kill an old man." "Of course not." "But how know you that my name is Thandar?" replied Waldo. "Nadara, she who is my daughter, has spoken of you often. Yesterday we saw you as you battled with that son of Nagula. Nadara told me then that it was you. What would Thandar among the people of Flatfoot?" "I come as a friend," replied Waldo, "among the friends of Nadara. For Flatfoot I care nothing. He is no friend of Nadara, whose friends are Thandar's friends, and whose enemies are Thandar's enemies. Where is Nadara? But first, where is Flatfoot? I have come to kill him." The words and the savage challenge slipped as easily from the cultured tongue of Waldo Emerson Smith-Jones as though he had been born and reared in the most rocky and barren cave of this savage island. It seemed that he had said the most natural and proper thing under the circumstances that there was to say. "Flatfoot is not here," said the old man, "nor is Nadara, she." But here Waldo interrupted him. "Korth, then," he demanded. "Where is Korth? I can kill him first and Flatfoot when he returns." The old man looked at the speaker in unfeigned surprise. "Korth," he exclaimed, "Korth is dead. Can it be that you do not know that he, whom you killed yesterday, was Korth?" Waldo's eyes opened as wide in surprise as had the old man's. Korth. He had killed the redoubtable Korth with his bare hands, Korth, who could crush the skull of a full-grown man with a single blow. Clearly he recollected the very words in which Nadara had described this horrible brute that time she had harrowed his poor, coward nerves as they approached the village of Flatfoot. And now he, Waldo Emerson Smith-Jones, had met and killed the creature from whom he had so fearfully fled a few months ago. And, wonder of wonders, he had not even thought to use the weapons upon which he had spent so many hours of handicraft and months of practice and preparation for just this occasion. Of a sudden he recalled the old man's statement that Nadara was not there. "Where is she, Nadara?" he cried, turning so suddenly upon the Ancient One that the old fellow drew back in alarm. "I have done nothing to harm her," he cried. "I followed and would have brought her back, but I am old and could not find her. Once, when I was young, there was no better trailer or mighty warrior among my people than I, but—" "Yes, yes," exclaimed Waldo impatiently. "But Nadara, where is she?" "I do not know," replied the old man. "She has gone, and I could not find her. Well do I remember how, years ago, when the trail of an enemy was faint or the signs of game hard to find, men would come to ask me to help them. But now, "Of course," interrupted Waldo, "but Nadara. Do you not even know in what direction she has gone? No? But since Flatfoot has set forth upon her trail, it should be easy to track the two of them." Flatfoot set out after Nadara. Cried Waldo, "Why?" "For many moons he has craved her for his mate, as has Korth," explained Nadara's father. "But I think that each feared the other, and because of that fact, Nadara was saved from both. But at last Korth came upon us alone and away from the village, and then he grasped Nadara and would have taken her away, for Flatfoot was not about to prevent. You came then, and the rest you know. If I had been younger, neither Flatfoot nor Korth would have dared menace Nadara, for when I was a young man I was very terrible, and the record of my kills was a—" "How long since did Flatfoot set out after Nadara?" Waldo broke in. "But a few hours since," replied the old man. "It would be an easy thing for me to overtake him by night, had I the speed of my youth, for I well remember—" "From where did Flatfoot start upon the trail?" cried the young man. "Lead me to the place." "This way then, Thandar," said the other, starting off toward the forest. "I will show you if you will save Nadara from Flatfoot. I love her. She has been very kind and good to me. She is unlike the rest of our people. I should die happy if I knew that you have saved her from Flatfoot, but I am an old man and may not live until Nadara returns. Ah, that reminds me, there is that in my cave which belongs to Nadara, and were I to die, there would be none to protect it for her. Will you wait for the moment that it will take me to run and fetch it, that you may carry it to her, for I am sure that you will find her. Though I am not as sure that you will overcome Flatfoot if you meet him. He is a very terrible man." Waldo hated to waste a minute of the precious time that was allowing Flatfoot to win nearer and nearer Nadara. But if it were in a service for the girl, who had been so kind to him, and for the happiness of her old father, he could not refuse. So he waited impatiently while the old fellow tottered off toward the caves. Those who had come halfway to meet Waldo had hovered at a safe distance while he had been speaking to Nadara's father. When the two turned toward the forest, all had returned to their work in evident relief. For the old man had told them that the stranger was the mighty warrior who had killed the terrible Korth with his bare hands, nor had the story lost anything in the telling. After what seemed hours to the waiting Waldo, the old man returned with a little package carefully wrapped in the skin of a small rodent, the seams laboriously sewed in a manner of lacing with pieces of gut. "This is Nadara's," he said as they continued their way toward the forest. "It contains many strange things of which I know not the meaning or purpose. They all were taken from the body of her mother when the woman died. You will give them to her." "Yes," said Waldo, "I will give them to Nadara, or die in the trying of it." Soon they came upon the trail of Flatfoot in the glade by the three great trees. They had not searched for it sooner, for the old man knew that it would start from that point upon its quest for the girl. The tracks circled the glade a dozen times in widening laps until at last, at the point where Flatfoot must have picked up the spoor of Nadara, they broke suddenly away into the underbrush. Once the way was plain, Waldo bid the old man be of good heart, for he would surely bring his daughter back to him unharmed if the thing lay in the power of man. Then he hurried off upon the new-made trail that lay as plain and readable before him as had the printed page of his former life. But never had he bent with such keen interest to the reading of his favorite author. This absorbing drama was written in the turned leaves, the scattered twigs, and the soft mud of a primeval forest by the feet of a savage man and a savage maid. Toward mid-afternoon Waldo became aware that he was much weaker from the effects of his battle with Korth than he had supposed. He had lost much blood from his wounds, and the exertion of following the trail had reopened some of the worse ones. So that now, as he ran, he was leaving a little trail of blood behind him. The discovery made him almost frantic, for it seemed to presage failure. His condition would handicap him in the race after the two along whose track he pursued, so that it would be a miracle were he to reach Flatfoot before the brute overtook Nadara. And if he did overtake him in time, what then? Would he be physically able to cope with the brawny monster? He feared that he would not, but he kept doggedly to the grueling chase. On and on he stumbled, until at dusk he slipped and fell exhausted to the earth. Twice he struggled to his feet in an attempt to go on, but he was forced to give in, lying where he was until morning. Slightly refreshed, he ate of the roots and fruit which abounded in the forest, taking up the chase again, but this time more slowly. He was now convinced that the way led back along the same trail which he had followed into the country, and when he reached the point at which he had first met Korth on the previous day, he cut across the little space. This intervened between the caveman's tracks and the point at which he had stood before he went down over the divide into the jungle toward the river and the ford. A moment later, he was rewarded by the sight of Nadara's dainty footprints as well as those of Flatfoot, leading away along his old trail. The act had saved him several miles of needless tracking. All that day he followed as rapidly as his weakened condition would permit, but his best effort seemed dismally snail-like. Along the way he bowled over a couple of large rodents, which he ate raw, for he had long since learned the desirability of a meat diet for one undergoing severe exertion. He had conquered his natural aversion for the uncooked flesh. He even had come to relish it, though often as he dined thus a broad grin illumined his countenance at the thought of his mother and Boston friend's horror. As he continued trailing the two, he was at first surprised to discover the fidelity with which Nadara had clung to his old trail, and because of this he often was able to save miles at a time by taking crosscuts. But at last on the third day, when he attempted this at a place which would have saved him fully 10 miles, he was dismayed by the discovery that he could not again pick up either Nadara's trail or that of the caveman. Even his own old trail was entirely obliterated. It was this fact which caused him the greatest concern, for it meant that if Nadara really had been following it, she must now be wandering aimlessly, possibly in an attempt to again locate it, in which event her speed would be materially reduced and the probability of her capture by Flatfoot much enhanced. It was possible, too, that the beast already had overtaken her. This, in fact, might be the true cause of the cessation of the pursuit along the way which it had proceeded up to this point. The thought sent Waldo back along his former route, which he was able to follow by recollection, though the spoor was seldom visible. He came upon no sign of those he sought that day, but the next morning he found the point at which Nadara had lost his old trail upon a rocky ridge. The girl evidently assumed that it would lead into the valley below, where she might pick it up again in the soft earth, and so her footprints led down a shelving bluff, while plain above them showed the huge imprints of Flatfoot. Up to this point at least he had not caught up with her. Waldo breathed a sigh of relief at the discovery. The trail was at least 2 days old, for Nadara and Flatfoot had traveled much more rapidly. The wounded man haunted their footsteps like a grim shadow. About noon Waldo came to a little stream at which both those who preceded him had evidently stopped to drink. He could see where they had knelt in the soft grass. As Waldo stopped to quench his own thirst, his eyes rested for an instant upon the farther bank, which at that point was little more than 10 feet from him. He saw the opposite shore slope down to a muddy beach. What riveted his attention were several deep imprints in the mud. He could not be certain, of course, but he was sure enough that he had recognized them to cause him to leap to his feet. Forgetful of his thirst, he plunged through the stream for a closer inspection. As he bent to examine the spoor, he could scarce repress a cry of exultation that had been made by Nadara as she stooped to drink. It was at the very spot not 24 hours before. She must have circled back toward the brook. But the greatest cause for rejoicing was that Nadara's trail alone was there. Flatfoot had not yet come upon her. And Waldo now was between them. The knowledge that he might yet be in time, and that he was gaining sufficiently in strength to make it reasonably certain he could overhaul the girl, filled him with renewed vigor. He hastened along Nadara's trail now with something of the energy that had been his before his battle with Korth. His wounds had ceased bleeding, and for several days he had eaten well and slept soundly. He reasoned that only by conserving his energy and fortifying himself in every way possible could he succor the girl. That night he slept in a little thicket which had evidently harbored Nadara the night before. The following day the way lay across a rolling country, cut by numerous deep ravines and lofty divides. That the pace was telling on the girl, Waldo could read in the telltale spoor that revealed her lagging footsteps. Upon each eminence the man halted to strain his eyes ahead for a sight of her. About noon he discerned far ahead a shimmering line, which he knew must be the sea. Surely his long pursuit must end there. As he was about to plunge on again along Nadara's trail, something drew his eyes toward the rear, and there upon another hilltop a mile or two behind he saw the stocky figure of a half-naked man. It was Flatfoot. The caveman must have seen Waldo at the same instant, for, with a menacing wave of his huge fist, he increased his gait to a run, disappearing into the ravine which lay at the bottom of the hill. Waldo was undecided whether to wait for the encounter where he was or hasten on in an effort to overtake Nadara, that she might not escape him entirely. He knew he stood a good chance of being killed. And he also knew that were he victorious, it might easily be at such a price that he would be physically incapable of continuing his search for the girl for many days. As he meditated, his eyes wandered back and forth across the landscape before him, searching for Nadara. To his right lay, at a little distance, a level plain which stretched to the foot of low-lying cliffs at the valley's southern rim, some 3 or 4 miles distant. In this direction his view was almost unobstructed, but it was not in the direction of the girl's flight, so that it was but by accident that Waldo's eyes swept casually across the peaceful scene. This scene would, at another time, have chained his attention with its quiet and alluring beauty. It was as he swept a backward glance in the direction of Flatfoot that his eye was arrested. The hint of something far out across the valley, a little behind his own position. To the Waldo of a few months previous it would not have been visible, but the new woodcraft of the man scented the abnormal. You're watching this video on Good Stories. If you're enjoying it and find it inspiring, don't forget to hit that like button. It's the best way to support the channel and keep these stories coming. In the vague suggestion of movement out among the long waving grasses of the plain. And now, with every sense alert and riveted upon the spot, he was quick to perceive that it was an animal, moving slowly toward the cliffs at the upper end of the valley. Presently a little rise of ground, less thickly grassed, brought the creature into full view for an instant. But in that instant Waldo saw it was a woman. As he turned to hurry after her, he saw Flatfoot top another hill a half-mile nearer than he had before been, and as the caveman came into view, he turned his eyes in the direction that Waldo had been looking. A second later, and he had abandoned the pursuit of Waldo and was running rapidly toward the woman. Nadara had apparently circled back once more, this time from the sea. Coming up the valley she had passed Waldo and come opposite Flatfoot before either of them had discovered her. The young man gave a little cry of alarm. He realized the caveman was nearer to the girl than he. By a good half-mile, he judged, and so he put every ounce of his speed into the wild dash he made down the hill into a gully which led out upon the valley. On and on he raced, unable to see either Flatfoot or Nadara. Hoping, ever hoping, that he would be the first to win to her side. For Nadara had told him of the atrocities of such a creature. Nadara, being upwind, caught neither the scent nor noise of the two who were racing madly toward her. The first knowledge she had that she was not alone in the valley was the sight of Flatfoot, as he broke suddenly through a clump of tall grass not 50 paces from her. She gave a little scream and started to run. But she was very tired from the days of unremitting flight, which had so sorely taxed her endurance, and thus it was no wonder that she slipped and fell before she had taken a dozen steps. Scarcely had she gained her feet when Flatfoot was upon her, one hand grasping her by the arm. "Come with me in peace, or I will kill you," he cried. "Kill me, then," retorted the despairing girl, "for I shall never come with you. First will I kill myself." Flatfoot did not wish to kill her, nor did he wish her to escape, as she would be very likely to do should he be interrupted by the fellow, who must even now be quite close to them. Possibly, if he could keep the girl quiet, they might hide in the grass until their pursuer had gone by, and so Flatfoot clapped a rough hand over Nadara's mouth and dragged her back along the trail. The girl struggled, striking and clawing at the hairy brute that pulled her along at his side, but she was as helpless in his clutches as if she had been a day-old babe. She did not know that help was so close at hand, or she would have found the means to free her mouth and cry out once at least. As it was, she wondered why Flatfoot attempted to silence her. In this way, if there were none to hear her screams. For days she had known that the caveman was on her trail, for once in doubling back upon herself she had passed but a short distance from a ridge she had traversed the preceding day, and had seen the man's squat figure and recognized his awkward, shuffling trot. It was this knowledge that had turned her away from the old village, toward which she had been traveling since she lost Thandar's trail, and sent her in search of a new country in which she might lose herself from Flatfoot. As the man dragged her roughly on through the grass, Nadara racked her brain for some means of escape, or a way to end her misery before the beast could have his way with her. But there came no ray of hope to her poor, unhappy heart. If Thandar were but there, he would save her, even if it were but to desert her the next instant. But did she wish to be saved again by him? Now that she pondered the idea, she was quite sure that she would rather die than see him again, for had he not twice run away from her? In her misery, she put this interpretation upon the remarkable disappearance of Thandar. After his battle with Korth, he had waited until she was out of sight, and then he had risen and fled. He fled for fear she might return and discover him. She wondered why he should dislike her so much. She was quite sure that she had been very good to him, and had tried not to annoy him while they were together. Maybe he looked down upon her, for surely he was of a superior race, of that she was quite positive. And so Nadara was very miserable and unhappy and hopeless as the brutal Flatfoot dragged her far into the tall jungle grass. Presently she noticed that the caveman repeatedly cast glances toward the rear. What could he expect from that direction, or from any direction whatever, so far as that was concerned? Were they not days and days from their own people, in a land where there seemed no men at all? Flatfoot heard no sign of pursuit. He was growing more confident. The stranger had lost their trail. The caveman moved less rapidly, and as he went he looked now for a burrow. A burrow into which he might crawl with the maiden. Then there would be no further danger whatever. Tomorrow Flatfoot would come out and find the fellow and kill him, but now he had pleasanter work in view. Nor did he wish to be disturbed, and at that very moment he caught a stealthy movement in the grasses a few yards to his right. Waldo had come upon the spot at which Flatfoot had overtaken Nadara. But a few moments after the brute had dragged her away, and on the instant had sought a higher piece of ground from which he could overlook the tall grass. Nor had he been long in finding a spot that, coupled with his 6 feet 2, brought his eyes above the level of the surrounding jungle. There he watched until he discerned a movement of the grass tops. After that it was but a matter of trailing. When Flatfoot saw what he took to be his enemy, he threw Nadara across his shoulder and started on a run in the opposite direction, at right angles to the way he had been going. The ruse proved good, for when Waldo came to the point at which he had figured his path would cross the caveman's, he found no sign, and in searching about to locate the trail lost many minutes of valuable time. But at last he came upon that which he sought, and with redoubled speed set out at a rapid run through the tall grasses. He had proceeded but a short distance when the trail broke suddenly into the open, close by the base of the cliffs that he had seen from the hill that had given him his fleeting glimpse of Nadara. Ahead of him he saw the two he sought, Nadara across the burly shoulders of Flatfoot, and the caveman was making for the caves that dotted the face of the cliff. Were he to reach these, he might defend one of them against a single antagonist indefinitely. Almost at the moment that Waldo emerged from the jungle, Nadara saw him, and with a lunge threw herself from Flatfoot's shoulder. The man turned with a fierce growl of rage, and his eyes fell upon the giant rushing toward them. The girl was now struggling madly to escape or delay her captor. There could be but one outcome, as Flatfoot knew. He must fight now, but the girl should never escape him. Raising the huge fist that had killed many a man with a single blow, he aimed at Nadara. The first blow she dodged, and as the arm went up to strike again, Thandar threw his spear arm far back, and with a mighty forward surge drove his light weapon across the 100 feet. It was an awful risk. There was not a foot to spare between the hairy breast that was his target and the beautiful head of the captive. Should either move, the spear might pierce Nadara instead. Flatfoot's fist was crashing down toward that lovely face at the instant the spear found him. But he had moved just enough to place his arm before his breast so that it struck his arm instead of his heart. But it served its purpose. With a howl of pain and rage, Flatfoot, forgetful of the girl in the madness of his anger, dropped her and sprang toward Waldo. The latter had drawn his sword, not but a sharpened stick of hardwood, and stood waiting to receive his foe. It was his first attempt to use either sword or shield in combat. As Flatfoot came toward his antagonist, he pulled the spear from his arm and, stooping, gathered up one of the many rocks that lay scattered about at the base of the cliff. The caveman was roaring like a mad bull. Hate and murder shot from his close-set eyes. His upper lip curled back, showing his fighting fangs, and a light froth flecked his bristling beard. Waldo was sure there had never existed a more fearsome creature, and he marveled that he was not afraid. The very thought of what such a charge would once have done to him brought a smile. At sight of that taunting smile, Flatfoot hurled the rock full at the maddening face. With a quick movement, Waldo caught the missile on his buckler, from whence it dropped harmlessly to the ground. Flatfoot did not throw again, and an instant later, he was upon the Bostonian, the pride and hope of the cultured and aristocratic back Bay Smith Joneses. When he reached for the agile, blonde giant, he found a thin sheet of hide-covered twigs in his way, and when he tried to tear it down, the point of a sharpened stick was thrust into his abdomen. This was no way to fight. Flatfoot was scandalized. He jumped back a few feet and glared at Waldo, then he lowered his head and charged again with the clear intention of rushing him off his feet. This time the sharp stick slipped quickly over the top of the hide-covered atrocity and pierced Flatfoot's neck just where it joined his thick skull. Burying a foot of its point beneath the muscles of the shoulder, it brought a scream of pain and rage from the hairy beast. Before Waldo could withdraw his weapon from the tough sinews, Flatfoot had straightened up with a sudden jerk that snapped the sword short, leaving but a stub in his antagonist's hand. Nadara had been watching the battle breathlessly, ready to flee should it turn against her champion, yet at the same time searching for an opportunity to aid him. Like Flatfoot, the girl had never before seen spear or sword or shield in use, and while she marveled at the advantage which they gave Thandar, she became dubious when she saw the sword broken. For the spear had been snapped into kindling wood by Flatfoot when he tore it from his arm. But Waldo still had his cudgel, fastened by a thong to his sword belt. As the caveman rushed upon him again, he swung a mighty blow to the low, brutal forehead. Momentarily stunned, the fellow reeled backward for a step, and again Waldo wielded his new weapon. Flatfoot trembled, his knees smote together, he staggered drunkenly, and then, when Waldo looked to see him go down, the brute power that was in him sent him hurtling at the Bostonian's throat. Catapulted by the enormous strength of his mighty muscles, the squat, bear-like animal bore Waldo to earth, and at the same instant each found the other's throat with sinewy, viz-like fingers. They lay very still now, choking with firm, relentless clutch. Every ounce of muscle was needed, every grain of endurance. Waldo was suffering agonies after a moment of that awful death grip. He could feel his gasping lungs struggling for air. He tried to wriggle free from those horrible fingers, but not once did he loosen his own hold upon the throat of Flatfoot. Instead, he tried to close a little tighter each second that he felt his own life ebbing. He became weaker and weaker. The pain was unendurable now. A haze obscured his vision, everything became black, his brain was whizzing about at frightful velocity within the awful darkness of his skull. The girl was bending close above them now, for both were struggling less violently. She had been minded to come to Thandar's rescue when suddenly she recalled his desertion of her. And all the wild hatred of the primitive mind surged through her. Let him die, she thought. He had spurned her, cast her off, he looked down upon her. Well, let him take care of himself, then, and she turned deliberately away to leave the two men to decide the outcome of their own battle, and started back upon the trail. She had taken scarce a score of steps when something flamed up in her heart that withered the last remnant of her malice toward Thandar. As she turned back again toward the combatants, she attempted to justify this new weakness by the thought that it was only fair to give him aid in return for the aid he had rendered her. That done, she could go on her way with a clear conscience. She wished never to see him again, but she could not have his blood upon her hands. At that thought, she gave a little cry and ran to where the men lay. Both were almost quiet now. Their struggles had nearly ceased. Just as she reached them, Flatfoot relaxed. His hand slipped from Waldo's throat, and he lay entirely motionless. Then the fair giant struggled convulsively once or twice. He gasped, his eyes rolled up and set, and with a sudden twitching of his muscles, he stiffened rigidly and was very still. Nadara gave one horrified look at the ghastly face of her champion and fled into the jungle. She stumbled on for a quarter of a mile through the entangling grasses. At last she came to that which she sought, a little stream, winding slowly through the valley down toward the ocean. Dropping to her knees beside it, she filled her mouth with refreshing water. In an instant she was up again, and off in the direction from which she had just come. Throwing herself at Waldo's side, she wet his face with the water from her mouth. She chafed his hands, shook him, blew upon his face when the water was exhausted, and then, tears streaming from her eyes, she threw herself upon him, covering his face with kisses, moaning inarticulate words of love and endearment half stifled by anguished sobs. Suddenly her lamentation ceased. She raised her head and looked intently into his face. Then she placed her ear upon his breast. With a delighted cry she resumed chafing his hands, for she had heard the beating of his heart. Presently Waldo gasped, and for a moment suffered the agonies of returning respiration. When he opened his eyes, he saw Nadara bending over him, a severely disinterested expression upon her beautiful face. He turned his head to one side. There lay Flatfoot quite dead. It was several moments before he could speak. Then he rose, very unsteadily, to his feet. "Nadara," he said, "Korth lies dead beside the 3 great trees in the glade near the village that was Flatfoot's. Here is Flatfoot's body, and about my loins hangs the pelt of Nagula. Taken in fair fight, I have done all that you desired of me. I have tried to repay you for your kindness when I was a stranger in your land. I do not know why you should have tried to kill me while I battled with Korth. No more do I know why you allowed me to live today when you could have slain me. I read dislike upon your face, and I am sorry, for I would have parted with you in friendship, so when I return to my own land, I should carry only the pleasant memory of it. When we have rested, I shall take you back to your father." All that had been surging to the girl's lips of love and gratitude was congealed by the cold tone of this dispassionate recital. Possibly Waldo's tone was colored by the vivid memory of the look of hate he had seen in the girl's eyes when he battled with Korth, for it was not even tinged with friendliness. And so the girl's manner was equally distant when she replied. In fact, it was even colder, for it was fraught with bitterness. "Thandar owed nothing to Nadara," she said, "and though it matters not at all, it is only fair to say the stone that struck you in the glade was intended for Korth." Waldo's face brightened. A load he had not realized was lifted from his heart. "You did not want to hurt me, then," he cried. "Why should I want to hurt you?" returned the girl. "I thought," and here Waldo spoiled the fair start they had made, "I thought you were angry because I ran away from you. After we had come to your village that time, months ago." Nadara's head went high and she laughed aloud. I was surprised that you did not come to the village, but after an hour I had forgotten the matter. It was with difficulty that I recognized you when I next saw you." Waldo wondered why he should feel such humiliation at this frank avowal. Of what moment to him was this girl's estimation of him? Why did he feel a flush suffuse his face at the knowledge that he was of so little moment to her that she had entirely forgotten him within a few months? Waldo was mortified and angry. He changed the subject brusquely. "Hereafter he should eschew personalities. Let us find a cave at a distance from the dead man," he said. "And there we may rest until you are ready to attempt the return journey." "I am ready now," replied Nadara. "Nor do I need or desire your company. I can return alone, as I came." "No," remonstrated Waldo doggedly. "I shall go with you whether you wish it or not. I shall see you safely with your father. I promised him." Nadara had been delighted with the first clause of his reply, but when it became evident that his only desire was to fulfill a promise made her father, she became furious, though she hid it. "Very well," she replied. "You may come if you wish, though it is neither necessary nor as I would have it. I prefer being alone." "I shall not force my company upon you," said Waldo haughtily. "I can follow a few paces behind you." There was an injured air in his words which did not escape the girl. She wondered if he really deserved the harsh attitude she had maintained. They found a cave a half-mile down the valley, where they took up their quarters until Waldo should be rested. For the girl insisted she was fully able to commence the return journey at once. The man knew better, and so he let her believe the delay was on his account rather than hers. He doubted her ability to cope with the hardships of the long journey without an interval for recuperation. The next morning found them both rested and in better spirits. So there was no return to their acrimonious encounter of the previous day. As they walked toward the forest down the valley, Waldo dropped a few paces behind her in deference to her wish. As he walked, he watched the graceful movements of her lithe figure and the lines of her profile as she turned her head in search of food. How beautiful she was! It was incredible that this wild cave girl should have greater beauty and a more regal carriage than the queens of civilization. Waldo admitted he had never even dreamed of such perfection. He wished that he could say as much for her disposition. That was atrocious. It was unbelievable that such a wondrous exterior could harbor so much ingratitude and coldness. Presently they came among the trees where the ripe fruit hung, and as Waldo climbed nimbly among the branches and tossed the most luscious down to her, the girl watched him. She noted more closely the marvelous change that a few months had wrought. She had thought him wonderful before, but now he was a very god. She did not think just this, for she knew nothing of gods other than demons supposed to enter the sick. But she thought of him as some superior creature. And then she ceased to feel aggrieved that he should care so little for her. He was not a man, he was something more than a man, and she had been wicked to treat him so shamefully. She would make amends. So she tried to be more kind thereafter, though there still remained a trace of aloofness. Together they sat upon the turf and ate their fruit, and as they ate they talked a little. For it is difficult for two young people to harbor animosity for a great time, especially when there is none other for them to talk to. "When you have returned with me to my father, Thandar," the girl asked, "where shall you go then?" "I shall return to the sea and watch for a ship to take me back to my own land," he replied. "I have seen but one ship in all my life," said Nadara, "and that was years ago. It stopped a long way from shore and sent many smaller boats to land. There were many men in the boats, and when they landed, my father and mother took me far into the forest away from the sea, and there we stayed until the strangers had sailed. They wandered up and down the coast and came back into the forests for a few miles. My mother said they were searching for me, and that if they found me they would take me away. I was very much frightened." At the mention of her mother, Waldo recalled the little parcel that Nadara's father had given into his custody for the girl. He unfastened it from the thong that circled his waist, where it had hung beneath his panther skin garment. "Here is something your father asked me to bring you," he said. The girl took it and examined it as though it was entirely unfamiliar. "What is it?" she asked. "Your father did not say, other than that it contained articles your mother wore when she died," he said tenderly. A great pity welled up in his heart for this poor, motherless girl. "That my mother wore," Nadara repeated, her brows contracted in a puzzled frown. "When my mother died, she wore nothing but a single garment of many small skins very old and worn, and that was buried with her. I do not understand." She made no effort to open the package, but sat gazing far off toward the ocean, which was just visible through the trees, entirely absorbed in reverie. "Could the thing that the old woman told me have been true?" the girl mused half aloud. "Could it have been because it was true that my mother fell upon her until she had nearly killed her? I wonder if—" But here she stopped, her eyes riveted in sudden fear and hopelessness upon a thing she had just espied in the distance. A great lump rose in her throat, tears came to her eyes. With them came the full realization of what that thing beyond the forest meant to her. She turned her eyes toward the man. He was sitting with bowed head, playing idly with a large beetle. He had penned it within a tiny palisade of small twigs. At length he made an opening in the barrier. "Go your way, poor thing," he murmured. "Heaven knows I realize too well the horrors of captivity to keep any other creature from its fellows and its home." A choking sigh that was almost a sob racked the girl. At the sound Waldo looked up to see her pathetic, unhappy eyes upon him. Of a sudden there enveloped him a great desire to take her in his arms and comfort her. He knew not why she was unhappy, but her sorrow cried aloud to him. As he thought simply to the protective instinct of his sex, Nadara raised her hands slowly and pointed through the trees. It was as though she had torn her heart from her breast, so harrowing she felt the consequences of her act would be, but it was for his sake, for the sake of the man she loved. As Waldo's eyes followed the direction of her pointing finger, he came suddenly to his feet with a wild cry of joy. Through the trees, out upon the shimmering surface of the placid sea, there lay a white yacht. "Thank God!" cried the man fervently, and sinking to his knees, he raised his hands aloft toward the author of joy and sorrow. A moment later, he sprang to his feet. "Home, Nadara, home!" he cried. "Can't you realize it? I am going home. I am saved. Oh, Nadara, child, can't you realize what it means to me? Home, home, home." He had been looking toward the yacht as he spoke, but now he turned toward the girl. She was crouching upon the ground, her face in her hands, her slender figure shaken by convulsive tears. He came toward her and, kneeling, laid his hand upon her shoulder. "Nadara," he said gently. "Why do you cry, child? What is the matter?" But she only shook her head, moaning. He raised her to her feet, and as he supported her, his arms circled her shoulders. "Tell me, Nadara, why you are unhappy," he urged. But still she could not speak for sobbing, and only buried her face upon his breast. He was holding her very close now, and with her body pressed to his, a fire smoldering in his heart burst into flame. In the heat of it, there were consumed the mists that had been before the eyes of his heart all that time. "Nadara," he asked softly, "is it because I am going that you cry?" But at that she pulled away from him, and through her tears her eyes blazed. "No," she cried, "I shall be glad when you have gone. I wish that you had never come. I hate you." She turned and fled back up the valley, forgetful of the little packet Thandar had brought her, which lay upon the ground where she had dropped it. Without a backward glance toward the yacht, Waldo was off in pursuit of her. But Nadara was as fleet as a hare, so it was a much-winded Waldo who finally overhauled her on the cliff. "Go away," cried the girl. "Go back with your own kind, to your own home." Waldo did not answer. Waldo was no more. It was Thandar, the caveman, who took Nadara in his strong arms and crushed her to him. "My girl," he cried, "my girl, I love you." And because I am a fool, I did not learn until it was almost too late. He did not ask if she loved him, for he was Thandar, the caveman. Nor, a moment later, did he need to ask, since her strong, brown arms crept up about his neck and drew his lips down to hers. It was quite half an hour later before either thought of the yacht again. From where they stood upon the cliff's face, they could see the ocean and the beach. Several boats were drawn up, and a number of men were coming toward the forest. Presently they would discover the two upon the cliff. "We shall go back together now," said Thandar. "I am afraid," replied Nadara. For a time the man stood gazing at the dainty yacht, and far beyond it into the civilization which it represented, and he saw suave men and sneering women. And among them was a slender brown beauty, who shrank from the cruel glances of the women, and Waldo writhed at this, and at the greedy eyes of the suave men, as they appraised the girl. And he, too, was afraid. "Come," he said, taking Nadara by the hand. "Let us hurry back into the hills before they discover us." Just as the men from the yacht, which Mr. John Alden Smith Jones had dispatched to the South Seas in search of his missing son, emerged from the forest into view of the valley and cliffs. A caveman and his mate clambered over the brow of the ladder and disappeared toward the hills beyond. It was nearly dusk as the searchers were returning toward the beach. They had found no sign of human habitation in the valley, nor anywhere along the coast that they had so carefully explored. The commander of the expedition, Captain Cecil Burlingham, a retired naval officer, was in advance. They had penetrated the woods nearly to the beach when his foot struck against a package. It was wrapped in the skin of a small rodent. He stooped and picked it up. "Here is the first evidence that another human being than ourselves has ever set foot upon this island," he said. He cut the gut lacing with his pocket knife. Within the first wrapping, he found a chamois bag, such as women sometimes use to carry jewels about their persons. From this he emptied into his palm a dozen priceless rings, a few old-fashioned brooches, bracelets, and lockets. In one of the latter, he discovered the ivory miniature of a very beautiful woman. In the other side of the locket was engraved, "To Eugénie Marie Céleste de la Valois, Countess of Crécy, from Henry, her husband, the 17th of January 18. "Gad!" cried the old captain. "Now what do you make of that?" The Count and Countess of Crécy were returning to Paris from their honeymoon trip nearly 20 years ago, and after they touched at Australia were never heard of again. What tragedy, what mystery, what romance might not these sparkling gems disclose had they but tongues?